winning against China when America's White House seems so pro-China? Can it be done? That's the topic of today's Bold and Blunt, and I'm your host, Cheryl Chumley, giving you a Christian conservative look at today's news, politics, culture, and events. So China is coming on strong under this White House administration. China's got the Belt and Road Initiative. China's got Hunter Biden as a good friend. China's got all the chips on China's side. And what does America have? Joe Biden, Kamala Harris. I would say the odds are stacked in China's favor right now. For communists, life is looking pretty good. I'll get into that in just a second, but I want to quickly mention that if you like Bold and Blunt, you can download Bold and Blunt at edify.app. That is the online platform for faith-based podcasts. Bold and Blunt is among its offerings, or you can also get Bold and Blunt wherever podcasts are offered, including at WashingtonTimes.com. Listen to this from Senator Tom Cotton's website. Listen to the language of his website page on China, March 18th, 2021, what the U.S. must do to beat China. Pretty blunt headline, but wait. The content to follow is equally, if not more, blunt. The United States Cold War with China, Senator writes. Already, you know where he stands. We are at a Cold War with China, and there are many communist apologists in America right now who would refute that characterization. But I happen to agree. The United States' Cold War with China will determine the course of the next century, Senator Cotton writes. Agree? Disagree? I agree. I agree. Wholeheartedly, I agree. To sweep Chinese communism into the ash heap of history, he writes, we must wage an economic long war through targeted decoupling and rigorous economic competition. For 3 decades, he continues, Washington and Wall Street integrated our economy with China's. Absolutely. To America's great detriment, I have to say. Where do you get your pharmaceutical prescription medications now? They're not really happily made in America. Donald Trump, the previous president, saw the perils of China and expressed the perils of China, and more than that, fought the perils of China. President Joe Biden? Well, Hunter Biden. Need I say more? Meanwhile, the senator writes, the Chinese Communist Party perpetrated a devastating trade war against our nation. Let me sidestep. A trade war that Donald Trump fought. Back to Senator Cotton's piece. Meanwhile, the Chinese Communist Party perpetrated a devastating trade war against our nation through systemic cheating, theft, and espionage. China destroyed millions of American jobs and gained a dominant position in the manufacture of advanced technology and essential supplies. I think it's safe to say that the Communist Party in China doesn't have any love lost for Senator Cotton. He writes, our economies are now dangerously entwined, and the United States continues to fuel the growth of our greatest adversary. Thank you, Joe Biden. That was my addition, not the senator's. This must end, he writes. The United States must decouple our economy from China's, where we are vulnerable, retaliate against Chinese abuses, and rebuild America's economic might, especially in essential supplies, like medical supplies, right? And high-tech manufacturing. Okay, so that's pretty clear. That is pretty clear language about where Senator Cotton and all the sane people in America stand in regards to China. And now, here comes Joe Biden. Biden tells Xi there will be, quote unquote, consequences if China aids Russia's war in Ukraine. That's what Vanity Fair put as a headline back in March. in a report on how the Chinese president has reportedly criticized sweeping and indiscriminate sanctions on Russia, and subsequently how the United States president responded to China's criticism. Biden, wrote CNN in May, Biden says U.S. would respond, and this is quotes, militarily, end quote, if China attacked Taiwan. But White House insists there's no change in policy. Nothing to see here. President Joe Biden, I'm reading from CNN now, said that the United States would intervene militarily if China attempts to take Taiwan by force, a warning that appeared to deviate from the deliberate ambiguity traditionally held by Washington. You know, Joe Biden said that because Joe Biden is weak, and he knows he's weak, and he knows that the world's leaders sees him as weak, so he has to say things in his strongest terms as he can come up with. And even though it sends his advisors and speechwriters into a tizzy, and even though the world's leaders, including in China, know that he doesn't mean what he says, he still has to maintain the facade and put on a show of strength, of White House strength, because he's got an image. He's got an image to protect. And midterm elections are coming, don't you know? And then there was that whole Afghanistan thing, which we don't like to mention because midterm elections are coming, don't you know? You know, Americans should really fear the next couple years of a presidency under Joe Biden because China is just all kinds of steamrolling their agenda through the world right now. China's Belt and Road Initiative. It's an ambitious plan, ChathamHouse.org writes, of the BRI, to develop 2 new trade routes connecting China with the rest of the world. But the initiative is about far more than infrastructure. Yes, it is. Ultimately, it is about spreading communism around the world. Once again, Donald Trump and Donald Trump's administration recognize that. They recognize the deeper peril of this so-called infrastructure and economic plan. They recognize the deeper peril as the cultural and social takeover of any light of freedom in the world, to darken it with the rot of communism. BRI, according to Chatham House, has 3 main models, 3 main bullet points. The first and most discussed internationally is China's rivalry with the United States. There is no doubt that China's intention, Chatham House writes, is to make participating nations interdependent with the Chinese economy and thereby build economic and political influence for China. See that? Political influence. That means spread communism. A second key reason that China wants to push forth this initiative, Chatham House writes, has to do with a legacy. China's communist government has a legacy that it wants to build. The Belt and Road framework provides an alternative market for China's vast state-owned companies beyond the borders of China. And in that way, China gets to advance its economic legacy, its corporate legacy around the world. Finally, Chatham House writes, the Belt and Road is seen as a crucial element in the Chinese government's efforts to stimulate economies of the country's central provinces, which historically lag behind richer coastal areas. The government uses the Belt and Road to encourage and support businesses in these central regions, allocating budget generously and encouraging businesses to compete for Belt and Road contracts. So once they get their influence felt in the economic sector, once they solidify an economic presence that ultimately leads consumers or governments or communities in those areas of presence to depend on them for certain things, then sort of like a carrot stick approach that the United States, as a matter of fact, uses with its foreign aid, then China's communist government, will be able to push a communist agenda as a condition of continuing provision of those services, of those bits of infrastructure, of that economic foothold. Like I said, the previous administration recognized the danger of China, recognized the long-range plans of China to use the economy, to use the education systems, to use the entertainment industry, to use whatever it could to gain footholds, to appear to be reliable, to appear to be even amicable, and then, wait for it, here comes the stick, the big communist stick, the big communist takeover. China's got a long-range plan. And look, this country right now, there are too many in America who don't even acknowledge China's guilt with COVID-19. Our own government, our own National Library of Medicine, under the National Institutes of Health, wrote this August 2021 under the headline COVID-19 Pandemic Origins, Bioweapons, and the History of Laboratory Leaks. To date, this writer writes, to date, the coronavirus disease 2019 COVID-19 pandemic has taken more than 3.5 million lives. Many of these deaths have been attributed to misleading information that fragmented a coordinated effort to mitigate loss of life. Future pandemics will continue to be a threat, so it is important to lay bare the true cause of this devastation. Agree, right? We need to know the source of the virus. Well, back to this piece. From the beginning, the origins of the pandemic have been debated, even though a natural zoonotic transfer to humans has been determined as the likely cause. Did you catch that? All natural, a natural progression from animals to humans. From humans back to animals. Nothing to see here. No lab intrusion, no lab intervention. Okay, back to this piece. However, speculation around a viral bioweapon and laboratory leaks remains. There's that old lab narrative coming up again. This writer is dismissing it. The evidence for the origins of this current pandemic, COVID-19, can be found in the science and history behind biological outbreaks and the signs of bioweapon use. Let me skip down a little bit and just read two more lines. The virus as a bioweapon and possible laboratory leak from legitimate research are the two most common remaining theories about the origins of SARS-CoV-2. The aim of this perspective, meaning this government-sponsored, this government-approved National Institute of Health perspective, is to show that the current pandemic is unlikely to have resulted from either bioweapons or a laboratory leak. In other words, nothing to see here. Go home, folks. Well, we want to cover for China, don't we? We want to make sure China doesn't emerge the bad guy from this whole coronavirus chaos that we've been living under and that we still continue to live under. So what's the truth? Well, I have a guest with me today. His name is Frank Gaffney. He's the founder of the Center for Security Policy, and he and a team of his experts and analysts have been working furiously over the months to put together the truths of the Wuhan lab and the emergence of the COVID virus and so forth. And he is here today to discuss the findings. So, Frank Gaffney, thank you so much for being on Bold and Blunt. I really appreciate your time.
Oh, I'm delighted to do it. Thank you for yours.
So your Center for Security Policy has put out this new report, Chinese Communist Party at War with America. Just run down the highlights of that report.
This had the genesis in, several previous efforts to get a second opinion on a major national security controversy, when the official line was deemed to be wrong, and some fresh independent analysis warranted. Hence we call this Team B3. And the Team B3 group of national security professionals, former intelligence officers, and a member of Congress, Congressman Pete Hoekstra, former chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, came together to assess where the Chinese COVID virus, known formally as SARS-CoV-2, came from. The intelligence assessment has been, they can't really tell. Maybe it was from nature, maybe it was from a laboratory. One of the most important findings by this Team B3 group was there's no evidence that it came from nature, and a lot of evidence that it came from the Wuhan Institute of Virology, a biological warfare laboratory in Wuhan, China. And the second finding was that while we can't tell the virus escaped from that laboratory, whether it was released deliberately or whether it was an accident, what we can say for sure is that the Chinese Communist Party disseminated it worldwide once it was out. And the third and really key point is that decision, that deliberate decision to inflict this deadly disease on the world, including most especially the United States, was a deliberate biological warfare attack. And interestingly enough, Tucker Carlson, in his monologue last night, talked about this as something that reset, what's been called the liberal world order, and has really tremendously enhanced China's prospects to achieve what it is clearly intent on doing under the CCP, namely dominating the world. So that's really the crux of our report, is this fits into both the doctrine and the intentions and the capabilities of the Chinese Communist Party to use biological warfare to secure its supremacy worldwide and quite possibly the destruction of our country.
Now, part of the info, part of the data that your report puts forth is that the CCP strategically unleashed this virus specifically to depopulate the United States and then take it over and colonize it. What data, what proof do you have to, or is that just a political hypothesis?
No, unfortunately, there's factual underpinning for it. As I say, it is the doctrine of the Chinese Communist Party to use biological warfare. In fact, what you're referring to is not specific to this particular pandemic, because I think it wasn't virulent enough to accomplish that goal. I think what was done here was a proof of concept of just how destructive a lethal biological agent could be. But the specific quote that you're talking about there came from the then defense minister of China, a fellow by the name of Chi Hao-chen. This is about 20 years ago. And he was characterizing what Deng Xiaoping, the general secretary of the Chinese Communist Party, directed back in the early 1990s, namely to have as the goal of China's, by the way, illegal biological warfare program, the depopulation of the United States so that it could be colonized by the Chinese. And one of the things that we've done in the book is to demonstrate that not only was that something that Shi Hao-chen talked about, but that it is an ongoing subject of scientific and military journals in China, where they very explicitly talk about the utility of biological warfare, the virtues of it. They even call it a humane technique for waging war. It doesn't destroy the infrastructure, which is particularly interesting if you seek to colonize the place. But most especially, Cheryl, that it has the virtue, from their point of view, of possibly being tailored in a way that attacks only certain ethnicities or nationalities or populations, so that the blowback on the people unleashing it might be reduced. Now, whether that can be accomplished or not, there's a lot of uncertainty about, but that's certainly their goal. That's what these researchers are working towards. And I think the evidence is pretty compelling that they see biological warfare as not only a perfectly legitimate form of weaponry and warfare, despite a commitment under the Biological Warfare Convention not to engage in it, but they're also very busily building up their capabilities to do just that, and have now tested the efficacy of it.
And yet America, for years now, has been conditioned to believe that China wants to become a partner in the world stage of economic stability. And many American corporations are reaching out to China because they think that this is the new world of investment. And America's youth are rapidly being brainwashed into believing that China is not a threat.
By, among other things, TikTok, which is an instrument of, I think, information warfare on the part of the Chinese Communist Party. No, you're so right. Look, we are not clear about the fact that the Chinese have no interest in being our partners or even our competitors. They seek to be our masters. They seek, if necessary, to remove the impediment to that ultimate objective, to be the center of the universe, as they say, is the destruction of the United States. And those in this country, whether it's on Wall Street or whether it's elsewhere in the business community, whether it's in the media, whether it's in academia, whether it's in political circles, the elite, if you will, that have been captured in many cases by the Chinese, or are being seduced by them to believe that if they just play ball, all will be well, are at best willfully blind. And at worst, they're, I think, really betraying our country. And there's a new group that's been stood up. I don't even know what the name of it is. Interestingly enough, they had an op-ed about their interest in just having more business-to-business communications as a way of restoring U.S.-China relations. This is crazy, frankly, in the face of the evidence that the Chinese are purposefully seeking, our destruction, but also our domination. And Cheryl, I would just tell you that our book, which is entitled "The CCP is at War with America," makes very clear that whatever we might try to do, whether it's to make them like us, or do business together, or otherwise
And nobody knew that better than the previous administration, the previous Donald Trump administration. And yet, in just a few short months, we have a new administration that has taken America down a path of trying to do China's bidding, it seems like, at every turn. So how can we, as American citizens, aware of the Chinese communist threat in America, both politically, economically, and culturally, how can we fight it if our political leaders are only too willing to get in bed with the communists in China?
In some cases, like Eric Swalwell, literally.
Yes.
This is a very apt question. And again, it goes back to what I said a moment ago. I think that we have to disabuse these elites that the kinds of policies they've been recommending, engagement as it's been called with China, are simply no longer tenable, let alone desirable. They are a formula for our defeat. And if they will not, recant their previous support for such policies, they simply have to be removed from the kinds of roles that they currently play, the kinds of influence that they currently exercise. And that's most easily done, of course, with the political class. Not that it's easy, but that there is a mechanism for removing them from office. And I personally think that has to be one of the most important issues put to the American people this fall. And this is not a partisan appeal. It's simply saying that we need to establish that those who wish to represent us, to speak and act on our behalf, ostensibly, actually understand the danger that the Chinese Communist Party represents. Mortal danger to our country. And we're preparing now a briefing based on the Team B analysis, which we hope to get in front of as many elected officials or candidates for office as we can. And then to seek from them commitments to take concrete and necessary actions in response to a proper understanding of the threat the Chinese Communist Party represents. And so we need the help of the American people in getting that done, and then holding accountable those they give a mandate to lead us.
And that segues perfectly into my last question. I was going to ask you, to incoming politicians, particularly the incoming president of the United States, what practical, maybe 2 or 3 steps would you like this person to say he or she will take against communist China to throw them off track, not just for the next election cycle, but for the next 10, 20, 30, and beyond years? What practical steps can American political leaders take right now?
This is the most important question of our time, I believe, and I would give you a couple of answers. It starts with understanding the threat.
Right.
They've got to get squared away on that, as do the people they represent. Secondly, I think properly understood, they must put our nation on a war footing, because we are at war with China, not because we want to be, but because they are engaged, have been for decades now, in unrestricted warfare against us. That's what they call it. And one facet of which, by the way, is biological warfare. And we've actually been attacked, and 1 million Americans are dead as a result of that attack. So this is no drill, as they say. And sure, what that means is we need to wean ourselves from Chinese supply chains. We need to ensure that we once again have the kind of industrial capability and access to raw materials and, for that matter, finished products that we need to have a functioning, safe, secure America. And not least, we need to restore the credibility of America's military. And this is partly a function of hardware. This is partly a function of training and wrecking operation. And this is really what Tucker spoke to very powerfully last night, and I completely agree with him. He put it slightly differently, but this is my line. Every policy that Joe Biden is pursuing, foreign or domestic, has two things in common. One, it's bad for America. And two, it's good for the Chinese Communist Party. That must end. And we really need a real course correction. You mentioned the Trump administration. Look, not since Ronald Reagan's day has anyone had been as clear-eyed as Donald Trump about a hostile and dangerous threat to our country. But even his administration was riven with people who were very supportive of China, had been part of the elite capture effort by the Chinese. So it wasn't perfect, but compared to what we've been seeing since he left office, it was the good old days. And just a last thought, I think this all has to have, in some way, shape, or form, a modeling for this threat, this time, this particularly dangerous regime in Beijing. What Reagan did when he dealt with the last totalitarian communist party and government that sought our destruction, namely the Soviet Union, which is to delegitimate it, to cut off the cash flow to it, and in every other way work to bring it down peaceably if possible, as in Reagan's case, and through other means if not, and to recognize that the alternative is the end of America. Full stop.
Wow, that's some sobering thoughts, but very crucial to look at. So the report, is it a report or a book? The CCP...
It's actually a book.
Okay, the CCP...
A long report, if you will.
Yep. The CCP is at war with America is the title. Where can people get it, Frank?
ccp@war.com.
Ooh. That's easy to remember. ccp@war.com. Frank Gaffney with Center for Security Policy. Thank you so much for your work on behalf of America and for being a guest on Bold and Blunt.
Thank you for your show. It's great to talk with you.
ccpatwar.com. ccp@war.com. That's the website. You can get a copy of the CCP is at War with America, a Team B report on the COVID-19 biological warfare attack, with a foreword by China expert Gordon G. Chang. Check it out, pick up your copy, because if you are waiting for this Joe Biden administration to give the truths about COVID-19 or about China in general, you're going to be waiting in vain. So you need to find alternate sources for the truth on China, on the virus, and on what America effectively needs to do in terms of policy against China to make sure that America leads the world in the coming years and not a communist nation. Thank you for listening. I want to remind you that you can get Bold and Blunt at edify.app, at washingtontimes.com, or wherever podcasts are offered. You can also subscribe to my 3 times a week newsletter at Washington Times. It comes out Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Just go to washingtontimes.com, scroll to the bottom of the page in the newsletter section, find my name, sign up, and you'll get my newsletter and my Bold and Blunt podcasts that come out on Tuesdays and Thursdays within the newsletters. One more thing. I have a new book that just came out. It is called Lockdown, the Socialist Plan to Take Away Your Freedom. And it talks about the beginning days of the virus and the middle days of the virus and the end days of the virus, and how we are still, thank you Democrats, thank you so much Joe Biden administration and your partners in China and the globalist government, how we are still living under the lies and deceptions of the coronavirus. So get your copy now. This is a book the Democrats do not want you to read. Thank you for listening. Tune in next time, and in the meanwhile, stay blunt, stay bold.